tonight.
It's unconscionable to us that Chuck Schumer should do this.
In order to come to the table, Republicans have to be here. They are not here.
As lawmakers blame their colleagues on the other side of the aisle, the government officially goes into shutdown mode. Plus, the path to peace in the Middle East.
The first step now is reaching consensus on this plan with all parties.
Where things stand after President Trump released a ceasefire plan. And
the Islamic Republic continues to be the leading state sponsor of execution.
The deadly crackdown taking place in Iran. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation. After Republicans and Democrats failed to secure a funding deal, the government shutdown is officially underway. Good evening in Washington, I'm Jenna Browder. Well, after weeks of ill-fated negotiations, parts of the U.S. government are closed for business. And as of now, there is no sign that that'll change anytime soon. Both Democrats and Republicans are digging in their heels, waiting for the other side to blink, and in the meantime, making their case to the American people that their party is not to blame.
Today's October 1st, the first full day of Donald Trump's government shutdown. Donald Trump and Republicans have barreled us into a shutdown because they refuse to protect Americans' health care.
Democrats are well aware of the damage of a government shutdown. We've heard it from them time and time again. But apparently, none of that matters to Democrats today. All that seems to matter is that their far-left base sees them fighting against President Trump.
And for more on this, let's bring in CBN News Capitol Hill correspondent Michelle London. London, what are both sides saying tonight?
Well, Jenna, as you mentioned earlier, both sides kind of blaming one another from both sides of the aisle. Leadership, I'll start with, they were holding pressers today, and I'll start with the GOP side. House Speaker Mike Johnson with one message: Republicans did our job. He said, quote, end quote, passing a common sense, nonpartisan bill a few weeks ago to keep the government open, and that a clean resolution would simply buy Congress more time. And he's talking about 7 more weeks, and that would land them at about at around November 21st to get that bill on the president's desk. Of course, a clean resolution in congressional speak, it means an extension of existing funds from the previous fiscal year. But Senate Democrats have blocked this clean CR a number of times because they have a number of concessions. Healthcare is the first thing. They want to reverse the series of Medicaid cuts that were introduced during the Big Beautiful Bill. They also want to extend those subsidies under Obamacare to help people with their healthcare insurance. So to enhance those subsidies provided during COVID that are set to expire at year's end. But there's a constant message, Jenna, from Republicans that Democrats only want to spend billions of dollars to fund healthcare opportunities for illegal aliens in this country. This all goes back to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, which limits eligibility for coverage for undocumented immigrants to receive Medicaid benefits. But Democrats say this is definitely a false narrative because undocumented citizens are already prohibited under federal law. So that's all been a part of this debate and ongoing fight on Capitol Hill.
Yeah. You know, while this happened, the fight goes on Capitol Hill, London, there are some real consequences for Americans. What will be some of the biggest areas impacted?
Well, Jenna, it does depend on how long this shutdown will last, right? So if it's a couple of days, federal workers will be coming to work without getting paid. And this is millions of federal workers. And it starts with air traffic controllers whose services will continue, right? But there'll be thousands of them will be coming to work during the shutdown, but they will be without pay. However, the Department of Transportation will halt hiring and field training. Also, pay for military and civilian workers could be delayed until funding is reached, forcing them to continue their duties without pay. Then there's this long-term shutdown, and that could impact more Americans. It could bring a big impact to food safety, which means recalls, investigations, limited investigations will continue, but long-term food safety efforts and medical product testing will come to a halt. Also, national parks will partially close as well. So we'll just have to see what happens as this thing goes along.
Okay. Michelle London, thank you very much. Capitol Hill
Thank you
correspondent
for
Michelle
having me.
London, thanks. All right, in other news tonight, Israel is intensifying its military action in Gaza City as the Jewish state awaits Hamas's response to President Trump's peace plan. Members of the terror group are meeting with Qatari officials to try to come to a resolution.
Regarding ending the war and bringing aid in, of course, the first step now is reaching consensus on this plan with all parties. The Israeli side had initially expressed approval on the plan based on what had been agreed upon. But now, as we said, we are in the stage of consultations with the negotiating delegation of Hamas.
And President Trump says Hamas has little room for negotiations. And yesterday, he gave the terror group a 2 or 3 day deadline to respond to his plan. More than 200 evangelical leaders organized by the Family Research Council recently signed a letter to President Trump about Israel's sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. FRC's president, Tony Perkins, joins us now. Tony, welcome. So tell us about this letter, Tony, and what you said to the president in it.
Well, Jenna, it goes back to the issue of Judea and Samaria, which is called by many the West Bank. This is the heartland of Israel. 80% of what we read about in our Bibles took place there in Judea and Samaria. And it's been the topic of the quote-unquote two-state solution going back 70 years. And so what we communicated, based upon some of the president's statements last week at the UN, was that we support the president. He's done so much for Israel. We applauded him on that, but warned that there's danger when we move in opposite direction of what the Word of God says as it pertains to the nation of Israel. Now, we don't know God's timetable, but we do know that that land is going to be restored to Israel. It has been in part, and that's the policy that the U.S. should have. Anytime we contradict that, going back to 2005 with the Gaza withdrawal, or even in the peace plan in 2020 that called for a two-state solution, there's been consequences even for our country.
Tony, do you know if how the letter might have been received, and also kind of the people who are around the president, do they see it in the same terms as you do?
I think many do, and I think the president does for the most part. And as we noted that in the conversation with the Prime Minister of Israel and President Trump and their press conference, the issue of sovereignty or limiting the ability of Israel to declare sovereignty was not on the table. So that was a good sign that was not overtly discussed in that meeting. And so Israel will be free to continue to annex areas that are strategic for their security, safety, and I would also add their identity as a people.
Yeah. Support for Israel seems to be going down. A new poll from the New York Times and Siena University finds American support for Israel has dropped since Hamas's attack nearly 2 years ago. In the immediate aftermath of the attack, Tony, 47% sympathized with Israelis, 20% sided with Palestinians. Today, that's 34% who side with Israel, 35% back the Palestinians. Tony, what do you make of this drop in support?
Well, I'm amazed that it remains that high, given how the media has addressed this issue. The secular media, the legacy media, has portrayed Gaza and the Hamas as the victims here, when in fact they're the ones that launched that attack 2 years ago. Polling also shows, Jenna, that support among evangelicals remains firm. Because it's anchored in a biblical truth and understanding of Israel and the Jewish people. That doesn't mean they support every political or military decision that Israel makes, but they do recognize Israel's right to exist and their right to defend themselves. So what I would say is, for Christians, especially pastors, we need to be teaching our folks what the Bible has to say about Israel, and that will stabilize any polling that we see, at least among evangelicals.
Yeah. Tony, I want to switch gears here a little bit. The Department of Justice just filed a civil lawsuit against protesters who targeted a New Jersey synagogue back in 2024. They filed it under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrance Act, known as the FACE Act. You've advocated, Tony, to use this act to protect houses of worship. Tell us about that.
I have. All I can say is amen. I am so grateful that the Department of Justice is using this law that goes back to Bill Clinton in 1994. There was a provision attached by the late Orrin Hatch, a senator from Utah, who put in there at the very last minute an amendment that said, put the same provisions as this law was designed to protect abortion clinics from pro-life protesters. He put a provision that also protected churches from those who would disrupt worship services. We advocated in the last Trump administration to use this law because my view is if we use it to stop them and prosecute them for interrupting worship services, they'll want to get rid of the law. And this is the first time the FACE Act has been used. It was a Jewish gathering that pro-Palestinian groups came in a mob and disrupted their service. So I applaud the Department of Justice for using this.
Okay, Tony Perkins, president of the Family Research Council. Tony, always good to see you. Thank you, Tony. And coming up, imprisonment, torture, forced labor, and fines. How China's Communist Party is targeting religious leaders. Welcome back. A new report from the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom highlights the atrocities religious leaders face under the regime of China's Communist Party. The commission is recommending the State Department redesignate China to what's known as a country of particular concern, noting in their report, quote, government policies and mechanisms managing religious affairs do not protect freedom of religion or belief and are instead used to perpetrate particularly severe violations of religious freedom, including against religious leaders. Joining us now, former Missouri Congresswoman Vicky Hartzler, chair of the United States Commission on International Religious Freedom. Congresswoman, welcome. So the name of this report is Imprisonment, Forced Disappearance, Torture, Tools China Uses to Persecute Religious Leaders. How common are these tactics by the Chinese government?
Sadly, it's very, very common. The Chinese Communist Party has a very specific goal of reorienting the whole religion to facilitate and promote the Communist Party. It's called Sinicization. And they are forcing religious leaders to adhere to their political ideology, to bow down to it, and to change their entire form of worship according to how the Communist Party wants them to promote their own ideologies, such as they are requiring pastors. First of all, they want to oversee and appoint the pastors, but they're rewriting the Bible. They're asking that hymns be rewritten. They're having contests to incorporate CCP messages in them. They're replacing pictures of Jesus with pictures of Xi Jinping, as well as the Virgin Mary in Catholic churches, taking down crosses. If you don't comply with what the government wants, if you don't register and go along with all this, then they are imprisoning pastors, and along with that, many members of their congregation, and there are multiple instances of torture being inflicted upon them. It is totally horrific.
Yeah, so we noted that the Commission has asked the State Department to redesignate China as a country of particular concern. Practically speaking, what would that do?
Sure. Well, it gives a toolbox of options for our government to put pressure on the Chinese government to change their ways. For instance, as we're having these discussions with China about tariffs, it would be very appropriate, first of all, that this would be part of the discussion. It's part of the law, the International Religious Freedom Act, which elevated religious freedom equal with economic discussions. So we should say, you want to reduce your tariffs? Well, why don't you let Pastor Wang Li out of prison, and maybe we can talk about that. So it's supposed to be included in conversations, but other options included in this is sanctions, visa restrictions, denials of ability to travel by state officials. There's a multiple options that our government has, and we should use them, use this leverage to get the government to change its ways and promote religious freedom among its citizens.
Yeah, you know, what does this kind of persecution do to people trying to practice their faith? Does it turn people off and kind of make them, you know, steer away from their faith, or does it do the opposite and it just forces them underground?
Well, I had the privilege last week of visiting with some individuals who were in China and have been in China, family members there, and they're Christians. And they were sharing that despite this persecution, despite having to worship secretly in underground house churches because they refused to comply with the government regulations and the government approved churches, that the gospel of Christ is growing in China. And it's just China can't stop it. It's everywhere. There's millions of Christians now, and you know, this is happening even in other religions as well. The government doesn't just target the Christian churches, but also the Buddhist monks, and of course we have genocide. They're conducting in the Xinjiang province against the Uyghur Muslims, and have 1 million of them in re-education camps. We call them, you know, basically kind of like the Holocaust. And so it's truly a horrific situation that the Chinese Communist Party is inflicting on all of its citizens of faith. But certainly from what I'm hearing in the Christian world, it is actually causing more numbers to increase.
That's very encouraging. You had mentioned the Uyghurs. We've done a lot of reporting on the plight that they face in China. Why do you think the world, I mean, it doesn't seem like it just is kind of not getting the attention it deserves?
Well, yeah, it's been going on for several years now. I know when I was in Congress, we passed many pieces of legislation, for instance, requiring that our United States government and our country who has U.S. businesses cannot do business over there in those areas, and they have to certify that products are not coming from that area. And so trying to put pressure that away economically so that China can't use these poor individuals. So, but it needs to continue to be told what is going on there is terrible and horrific. And of course, they're requiring the sterilization and forced abortions. And that's why under Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, he designated as genocide.
Yeah, it's terrible, and we'll continue to shine a light on it here at CBN News. Vicki Hartzler, Chair of USERV, thank you so much. It's great to see you. The rise in the number of political prisoners facing death for dissent. We will show you where when Faith Nation returns. Well, a brutal crackdown is happening inside Iran, including mass executions and political arrests, with the violence taking place out in the open. A former war crimes prosecutor is warning of an unfolding massacre happening in plain sight. George Thomas reports.
Stephen Rapp, former U.S. ambassador at large in the Office of Global Criminal Justice, tells CBN News the Iranian regime isn't just cracking down with arrests or beatings, it's using executions to silence dissent, with the numbers rising fast after the recent war with Israel.
There are thousands of political prisoners, and they could charge them with these phony charges and begin mass executions of really judicial murders of peaceful opponents.
In 2023, Iran executed more than 850 people. A year later, that number jumped to 975. And now, just 8 months into 2025, over 700 executions have already been recorded.
The Islamic Republic continues to be the leading state sponsor of executions, second to the Chinese Communist Party.
Among those put to death, 3 Kurdish men and a top nuclear scientist accused of collaborating with Israel.
The regime fears its people more than a potential external attack because ultimately, in their perspective, they can absorb any attack on their military installations. However, if the discontent internally will to expand and lead to nationwide unrest, as it has in the past, it would really be the key catalyst for regime collapse.
Others sentenced to death are charged with vague offenses like, quote, enmity against God.
What I fear is instead of 1,000 a year, we could end up with literally tens of thousands being executed.
People are being rounded up all over the place. People are being stopped in the streets and told to hand over their cell phones while they check messaging history, photos taken, phone calls made, websites visited. I mean, it's just blanket across the board. Cars are being stopped and checked. Homes are being raided. No one is safe.
And it's not only political activists being targeted.
As the internal crackdowns expand and intensify, the religious minorities tend to be on the front lines of this repression apparatus.
Just last month, 21 Iranian Christians were arrested in these 6 cities. Officials accused them of spreading Zionist Christianity and, quote, acting against national security.
Those two things are the classic accusations for Christians when they get arrested and charged with something. Of course, the government just wants to stop the spread of Christianity in Iran, but this is amplified now because they are paranoid.
Days after the Israel-Iran ceasefire, the regime's state-run Fars news agency, which is tied to the Revolutionary Guard, openly called for a repeat of the 1988 massacre, when 30,000 political prisoners were secretly executed.
They got away with murder, mass murder in 1988. They think they can get away with it again.
As executions mount and repression deepens, human rights advocates warn the almost worldwide silence only enables the regime's growing brutality.
As long as the international community, the United States and Europe particularly, do not speak up against these heinous crimes, the regime therefore doesn't feel any obligation to scale back its internal repression.
George Thomas, CBN News.
And George hosts Abigail Robertson. George joins, hosts Abigail Robertson and Ryan Bethay to talk about the gospel going global on this week's episode of Heaven Meets Earth, the podcast. You can find it wherever you get your podcasts, on YouTube and the CBN Family app, or at heavenmeetsearth.com. All right, college students calling on God, the events that unfolded last night at this university. Finally tonight, God moving among Gen Z. Thousands of college students at the University of Tennessee spent last night worshiping, praying, and seeking spiritual renewal. More than 8,000 were at this latest Unite Us event. Some 500 people came forward to accept Jesus, and hundreds were baptized. Unite Us is holding 3 more events on college campuses in Arizona, Ohio, and North Carolina this fall. It's incredible to see. All right, that is going to do it for Faith Nation this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.